Imagine this. A cold wind sweeps across the corridors of power in Westminster. The lights of the Treasury burn late into the night. Behind those doors, one question echoes through the minds of Britain's top economists, investors, and politicians. Is the UK sleepwalking into another financial disaster, just like 1975? Back then, a desperate Labour Chancellor went cap in hand to the International Monetary Fund, begging for rescue. Today, history seems to be whispering the same warning, but this time, the numbers are far, far bigger. Before we dive deeper into this alarming story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Echo Britain, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinion truly shapes the debate on this channel, and the most insightful comments will be featured in our next episode. Now, let's uncover the truth behind Britain's mounting debt, the warnings from top economists, and whether Rachel Reeves might be steering the country toward a fiscal storm unlike anything we've seen in decades. It looks that way. Britain's national debt now stands at an eye-watering £2.9 trillion, almost the same size as the entire economy itself. To put that in perspective, back in 2008, after the financial crisis, debt was roughly 35% of GDP. Today, it's approaching 100%. But that's not the full story. According to the Taxpayers Alliance, once you include public sector pensions and PFI obligations, the total liabilities soar to over £12 trillion. That's £12 trillion, a number so large it defies imagination. And at the heart of this storm stands one woman, Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She claims to have inherited a £22 billion black hole from the Tories. But according to reports, she may have already doubled it to nearly £40 billion. Her plans? Borrow another £150 billion this year alone, a move that some say could drive the UK into a fiscal doom loop. Economists call it the doom loop, a vicious circle where rising debt leads to higher borrowing costs, which in turn deepen deficits, which then push debt even higher. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the faster you sink. And right now, Britain is borrowing over £300 million every single day, even though we're not at war, nor fighting a pandemic. Among advanced economies, the UK ranks as having the third highest deficit, third highest borrowing costs, and the fourth highest total debt. So how did we get here? And more importantly, can we get out? Let's start with Ben Ramanauskas, a senior research fellow in economics at Policy Exchange. His warning is stark. The UK's public finances are in a dire state and look set to get even worse, he says. According to his projections, the national debt could top 270% of GDP in the next 50 years, and unless productivity improves, it could explode beyond 640%. Think about that, 6 times the size of our entire economy. Ramanauskas warns that our unsound public finances could drive up borrowing costs, making debt even more expensive and putting homes and livelihoods in jeopardy. And it's not just about the numbers. He paints a disturbing picture. If bond market investors begin to doubt Britain's ability to repay, they could demand higher interest rates or stop lending altogether. A new crisis, a pandemic, a war, a deep recession could easily push the system over the edge. His prescription? Painful but decisive action. Public spending will have to be slashed, he says, especially on out-of-work benefits. He even calls for scrapping the state pension triple lock, describing it as unaffordable. But cutting isn't enough. He insists that Britain must slash red tape and build homes, energy, and transport infrastructure to get the economy growing again. His final words ring like a warning bell. While fears of an IMF bailout may be overblown, Rachel Reeves needs to get a grip. It's the only way to avert a full-blown economic crisis. Next comes Tom Clufferty, Executive Director of the Institute of Economic Affairs. He compares Britain's situation to the words of Ernest Hemingway, who once wrote, "Bankruptcy happens 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly." Clufferty believes that Britain might be living through that gradual phase right now, inching slowly, quietly, toward something that could one day become sudden. The UK budget, he reminds us, hasn't been balanced since the year 2000. In other words, we've been living beyond our means for a quarter of a century. He warns that as our population ages, rising demand for pensions, healthcare, and social care will dramatically increase spending. To cover those costs, Britain would need to double income tax within 70 years. But Clufferty is not entirely pessimistic. He acknowledges that because the UK borrows in its own currency, it technically can't go broke, it can always print money to pay the bills. Yet he quickly adds, the resulting inflation can be extremely damaging, even disastrous. It's not the same as going broke, but it's close. For him, the problem isn't technical, it's moral, political, and cultural. Our fiscal situation is a choice, he writes. We do not have to live beyond our means. To fix it, he calls for an ambitious pro-growth agenda, one that empowers the private sector and restrains public spending. It won't be easy, he admits, but it can be done. Then there's Will Ellis, senior economist at the Institute for Public Policy Research, who offers a very different take. Don't panic, he says calmly. No, Britain is not going bust. Ellis argues that while the debt may look alarming, approaching 100% of GDP, Britain is far from the brink. In fact, he points out that our debt levels are below those of the United States, 121%, France, 113%, Italy, 135%, and far below Japan, 237%. He reminds us that after the Second World War, Britain's debt soared above 250% of GDP, yet it eventually fell, thanks to decades of steady growth. According to Ellis, the cost of servicing the debt is expected to remain stable, and interest rates, though high now, are likely to ease in the coming years. Investors, he says, still trust the UK. Gilt auctions, the government's way of borrowing money, are oversubscribed, meaning demand is strong. Even the International Monetary Fund seems relatively relaxed, describing the UK as a country that appropriately supports growth while safeguarding fiscal sustainability. For Ellis, Britain's strengths are its floating currency and independent central bank, which give it resilience. This, he says firmly, is not a country heading for an IMF rescue. So, who's right? 3 economists. 3 perspectives. 1 warns of collapse. 1 urges reform. 1 tells us to breathe. And in the middle of it all stands Rachel Reeves, holding the most explosive financial brief in modern British history. Her challenge is monumental. On one hand, she faces pressure to invest in growth, infrastructure, and public services, the very things Labour promised voters. On the other hand, she must restore fiscal credibility after years of political turbulence, pandemic spending, and economic shocks. But critics say Reeves is cornered. Her plans to borrow £150 billion this year may look bold, but to the markets, it looks reckless. Every pound borrowed deepens the cycle. Every tax rise risks strangling growth. Some call it Reeves's doom loop, a phrase now whispered across Whitehall. Let's imagine a scenario. Interest rates spike again. Investors begin to question whether Britain can pay its bills. Bond yields surge. The pound tumbles. Mortgage rates climb. Public confidence cracks. It wouldn't take much, just a spark. A global shock, a sudden recession, or even a political misstep could turn today's pressure into tomorrow's panic. In that moment, Britain might once again look to the IMF. But here's the twist. The IMF couldn't afford to bail us out, even if it wanted to. The UK economy is simply too big. What it could do, however, is provide political cover, allowing frightened ministers to impose the kind of painful cuts no government dares to announce on its own. So, are we on the brink of another crisis? Not yet. But the warning lights are flashing, bright red. Britain's finances, once the envy of the world, now rest on fragile ground. If Reeves cannot control spending, restore confidence, and reignite growth, the consequences could echo through generations. In truth, the UK may not be going bust. But unless bold, disciplined leadership returns to the Treasury, we could still suffer a collapse of confidence, and that, in economics, can be just as dangerous as bankruptcy itself. Because markets don't run on facts alone. They run on faith. And right now, that faith is being tested. So here we stand, decades after Dennis Healey's fateful IMF appeal, staring once again into the same abyss. The faces have changed. The numbers are bigger. The stakes are higher. Britain's economic future now rests in the hands of Rachel Reeves, a chancellor many see as pragmatic, others as perilously ambitious. Will she steady the ship? Or will history repeat itself, only louder, faster, and harder this time? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the clock is ticking, and Britain cannot afford another financial reckoning. If you made it this far, I want to hear your thoughts. Is Rachel Reeves doing the right thing by borrowing to invest, or is she leading us straight into a debt storm? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, subscribe to Echo Britain, hit the like button, and stay tuned for more in-depth political stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines. Because sometimes, the numbers tell a story far more dramatic than politics ever could.